Now, David, looking back over the 70s of the music of going into the decade of into the 80s, how do you sort of look at music in the 70s?
Sort of like this.
How do you look at music in the 70s?
Like that.
Pardon?
Like that.
Right, now if I ask you both just the one person who's had more influence on music in the 70s, who would it be?
I don't know. Like the guitar players, it's got to be Jimi Hendrix, you know, because he's the one that's...
It's from the 60s.
Well,
He
he's
emerged
spilled
in
over
the
to the
70s.
70s. Oh, he emerged from the 70s. Well,
Elton John? No. David Bowie?
no.
Bruce Springsteen?
No.
Music was my first love, and it will be my last. Music of the future, and music of the past.
The 70s arrived amid the continuing turmoil of Vietnam. The buzz created by Woodstock is eradicated by the killing of 4 students during riots at Kent State University. The days of peace and love and the hippie subculture are finished. Hendrix dies, the first of the 70s rock casualties. Meanwhile, here in Australia, the record bands find record companies and radio stations at loggerheads. But most significantly, sadly, the start of the 70s sees the end of the Beatles.
Has anyone had a sort of a major influence in your mind on music in the 70s? Has any individual or group had a major influence, apart from yourself?
I can't really say one particular entity since the Beatles.
Right.
I would say as far as really changing the direction of music, the Beatles were the last
And that was the 60s.
huge, yeah, right.
Yeah.
So in the 70s,
I think the Beatles too, because they changed our style of living.
Of course, the Beatles were originally the reason why we started writing at all.
Right.
Because before that, there used to be, composers writing for artists, and the groups didn't used to do that themselves.
Right.
So in 63, 64, both Benny and I started doing that because of Paul McCartney and John Lennon. So throughout the years, they've been the strongest influence by far.
There are young kids today that think that don't know that Paul McCartney had a group before Wings.
Right.
And that it was the Beatles.
To give you a typical example of treading, of setting a certain trend, is when McCartney, for instance, when he was with the Beatles, did a number with his shirt. And he couldn't keep the collars down. So he put a safety pin underneath and fastened it underneath his tie and put his tie over it. That set a trend.
Right.
All of a sudden, people were buying the old-fashioned, tie pins that went underneath and fastened. That set a trend.
If the Beatles ever got back together for one performance, as we keep reading, and it started up again now, would it be just basic? Would you like it just to be basic, to walk on?
Well, I mean, there's no use kind of dreaming about what it'd be like, because I don't think it's ever going to happen.
Right.
So that's pretty basic.
That is
right
very
there.
basic, actually.
One night, Long John Baldry discovered him singing in the London Underground. Quite soon after, he's rocking up front of the Faces and heading for one of the big solo careers of the 70s.
Like, at the start of the 70s, you were with the band and you always insisted, that you would be referred to as a band member. Then you went out in a solo career before you formed the band. Now you're with another band and you're stuck with that.
Yeah.
What are you happiest with?
Happiest with?
Yeah. I mean, you obviously need a band, right?
Well, it helps, It's a little bit silly just to have the voice on the record without a band. It would sound a bit silly, but I think whereas this band, not only are they a better band than the Faces, are more understanding. They work a bit harder and they're professional. And the Faces were never there.
Right. Now, your music changed fairly radically over the years. Your approach to songwriting, was it all personal sort of reflections of songs, or what?
You asked me that question.
No, I know. I'm asking about it in the 70s.
Don't ask. That's a dicky question.
Well, can you answer it this time? You didn't answer it last
I
time.
thought we were going to talk about the 70s.
We are, about your albums in the 70s.
Yeah, which album do you want to talk about?
Well, Atlantic Crossing for a start.
That wasn't so good. That was a miserable album. I didn't like that one at all. That's the only one I can't listen to now. Don't like that one at all. Badly recorded, bad choice of songs. I wasn't writing good songs either in those days, I don't think.
Right. What about Tonight's the Night?
That was a good song.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Has it ever worried you that You know, the album you're doing may not sell because of a change in style and music?
It used to. I think I've got to get it into my mind now that one of these albums are not going to be so successful. I think what we're trying to do now is try and release the pressure a bit and just try and make music for ourselves, if we can possibly do that.
Right.
And in doing so, please everybody else. It's difficult. I don't know.
Going back, did America have that much influence by living in America on your music?
Probably Night on the Town album had a few songs in it. Georgie, perhaps I wouldn't have written if I'd have been living in London. But more so the musicians that played on the album, like Steve Cropper and all those guys.
Right.
It's different now. I think as a band we could record anywhere, which is I think what we're going to have to do, because we're not going to record in America anymore.
Right.
I think we're going to try out Paris or something like that. A useless piece of information for you.
Right. Now, as far as how do you rate ELO as a band?
I don't listen to them very much. I like what they do. It's good commercial pop music, and that's very difficult to make, I would imagine.
But is it important for a band to recreate on stage what is on record? How important is that to you, for instance?
I don't think it's all that important, really.
No?
If you've got a visual act, I think we play better on stage than we do on record.
When will there be a next tour, a world tour?
We're going to start in June.
Tuesday?
Right.
June, we're going to start next June, and the album will be out in June.
Yeah.
And I don't know where we're going to go. But I think it's about time we perhaps struck a happy medium, played one night at the big venue and 2 or 3 smaller venues.
Right.
Perhaps we'll do that. That's not my department.
Right. Well, a lot of artists felt that.
Sorry, lads.
A lot of artists felt that perhaps they were losing contact with their audiences by playing to, you know, the huge multi-stadium.
Yeah, well, people stand still, like most groups do. Just goes, how can you play 20,000 people? With us, we're a lot more visual. You know, we like fun the show for everybody, you know. It's very good. Which is what we do. No, I love the 70s. I mean, I just hope it'll continue in the 80s, but obviously that's not up to me.
Right.
We'll just do the best we can. And if you want us, we'll be here in the men's club.
If not for you.
While Rod Stewart was becoming bigger than those old familiar faces, the ladies were getting into the act too. Helen Reddy was on the verge of telling the world she was a woman, and another, a talented Aussie lady, returned to the UK after having served a lengthy apprenticeship in the coffee houses of Melbourne. In 1971, she released a self-titled album which became the starting point for her major success in America and then the world.
The banks of the Ohio and only say that you'll be
Do you think that having such success at such a young age can really make you a little stale by the time you're 30 or 35? Do you think you'll be really tired of the whole thing?
Oh, I hope not. No, I hope I'll... No, I wouldn't say that. I haven't thought that far ahead.
When I first went to England and started singing with Pat, there wasn't much opening for contemporary stuff unless you had a record, so you had to sing cabaret.
Right.
And cabaret, we went into recording and it changed again. I've tried to grow and stretch a little bit each time I've made an album, which is usually when I get the chance to try out new material. And I'm getting braver and braver, hopefully. Right. I'll go crazy the next one.
Yeah.
But you went into, especially with Grease, you went back to sort of almost the roots of your own music, of going into sort of a more gutsy rock and roll, you know?
Yeah. In the Go Show, though, I generally used to sing the ballads. I wasn't really, I mean, I wanted to, but I didn't really have the confidence to do much of the really funky stuff.
Right.
But now I'm getting the confidence and I really love doing it, you know, and John gives me the chance to try out all different kinds of styles.
Right. Over the last 10 years, how do you personally view the 70s music?
I think the biggest influence, I think the black music has been the biggest kind of influence on the now sound of the 70s, which I love. And Stevie Wonder probably is one of the strongest influences, but it's been longer than the 70s even, but he's sort of...
Well, it's strange. I mean, when we talk about, you know, particular influences, do you think Stevie Wonder has been an influence on 70s music?
Oh, sure he has. He and his contemporaries. The Bee Gees. I think the people that would go down in the 70s would have to be the Bee Gees. The Beatles will always stay there. I think they'll transcend the next 30 years.
Going back into the turn of the 70s, it was sort of not really thought of that sort of singers like yourself and Midler would be doing films, you know, combining the two sort of together. I mean, do you think that's been important?
This one that I'm doing now, is John Farrow's doing the music, half of the music, and Jeff Lynne from ELO is doing the other half. So the music is incredible. I mean, it's fantastic. This is the start. I think this could be the start of a whole spate of them if it's accepted. And the music is very, very contemporary. In Greece, which is really the biggest, Saturday Night Fever. Okay, Saturday Night Fever in Greece. Why did I forget Saturday Night Fever? I don't know where I was.
Well, we'll take Greece, for instance. In Greece, and it's funny, I mean, a lot of music writers that we've interviewed, you know, including the Elton Johns and the Paul McCartneys and that, say that it'll go back to rock and roll and it'll go back to lyrics, boy meets girl sort of thing. Now, Greece, even though it was sort of 50s music, but it was updated, was all of that, really, wasn't it?
Boy meets girl, boy loses girl, wins her back. It's the same story.
Now, when you first saw the script of that, did you think it was slightly smolchy?
No, because I saw the stage show in London about 8 years ago. Well, actually, it's 9 years ago, I think, when it just came out, and I remembered it and I loved it. So, and I liked the music, and it was instant. It was an instant gut feeling that it was the right thing to do. I loved it.
Right, now, Olivia Newton-John for the 80s.
For the 80s? Well, the beginning of the 80s will be this new movie called Xanadu that I'm doing, which is a fantasy again, much more fantasy than Grease even, with even more contemporary music and a chance to stretch a little bit in acting, which is really what I like to do more of.
And more albums?
Oh yeah, definitely.
1971 ends. Our national top 10 for that year contains 3 Australian singles, a sign of healthy development for Australian music, although our bands still haven't come to grips with the problems of making it overseas. It's also the only time in the decade that an Australian band tops the annual charts, and that distinction goes to Ross Wilson's innovative Daddy Cool. 1972 and it's time. Labour wins office for the first time in 23 years. Gough Whitlam enters the Lodge, and in America, 5 men enter the Watergate building. The method of entry, however, differs greatly. The world is stunned as the Munich Olympics are shattered by terrorists. Sunbury makes its mark on Australian rock. Jesus Christ Superstar opens. But internationally, music is marking time.
I guess I've managed to get through the 70s without, I'm not walking with a limp, you know. I managed to get through the 70s. They're not over yet. We're back to New Year's Eve actually be a little more appropriate for that.
In the 70s, people sort of got, in the early 70s, I turned away from music completely. After, because I had rock and rolls bands in the 60s and the Who were around and everything, and I completely turned away from it, went into theater and stuff, because I got real sick of it, because people talking about, it wasn't rock and roll anymore.
It feels to me like the 70s were the me decade,
right.
How I feel, what's best for me, my space, my time, the 60s will always seem like they were more concerned with causes of a bigger nature, of group energies.
I would say the smartest people of the 70s got their influences from decades gone by when they realized that nothing really was happening in the 70s. And here at the end of the 70s, everyone's raving about Knack and Cars and all these groups that sound like the early 60s. If that's moving forward, we could have skipped this last 10.
I think that they got burned out on all the poetry and, folk rock music of the early 70s, so now they don't want to hear any social statements or anything provocative. They just want to hear about, getting their nut, dancing.
There really wasn't an overriding, I don't think there really was an overriding voice that came at the beginning of the decade and lasted through the end of the decade.
60s had groups that were kind of self-contained. The music was simple enough that 4 and 5 pieces could do it. And then towards the very end of the 70s, you got the idea the groups were self-contained again. They could go out and travel, 5-piece bands, no heavy producers. 70s had tons of production, overproduced, too many strings, horns, conductors. It was a producer's album, producer's world.
There